May 14, 2026, Nasdaq, New York. A man in a navy suit walks onto the trading floor holding what looks like a dinner plate. It's not a plate, it's a single computer chip, 56 times larger than anything NVIDIA builds. In the next 6 hours, the stock will jump 68%. The company will close near $100 billion. OpenAI will be a customer. AWS will be a customer. The U.S. Department of Energy will be a customer. 2 men in that room will walk out billionaires by sunset. His name is Andrew Feldman, and by every metric, today is one of the biggest tech IPOs in American history. But here's what almost no one knows. 7 years before this morning, Andrew was making the painful walk to a boardroom every few weeks to explain why $200 million had just vanished into a chip the entire industry called impossible. And the real story isn't the IPO. It's about one summer morning, 5 engineers, and a single light that started to flash. To understand how Andrew Feldman ended up holding that chip, you have to go back, not to Wall Street, not even to Silicon Valley, but to a small house on the campus of Stanford University where Andrew was raised, literally, among professors and PhD students, where dinner table conversations revolved around physics and biology and the limits of what humans could build. He went to Stanford, then Stanford Business School, and by the time most of his classmates were taking corporate jobs, Andrew had already done something unusual. He'd helped sell his first company, a gigabit Ethernet startup, for $280 million. He was still finishing his MBA. By 2007, he co-founded another company, C-Micro. They built energy-efficient microservers. 5 years later, AMD bought it for $334 million. Andrew became a corporate vice president. He had everything a Silicon Valley career was supposed to give you. A wife, 2 children, a successful exit. The American dream, neatly packaged. And then he walked away from all of it. What none of his colleagues knew yet was that Andrew was about to attempt something that had already killed a Silicon Valley legend in 1980 and bankrupted a company that, at the time, had raised more money than any startup in history. In 2015, Andrew gathered 4 of his old C-Micro engineers in a borrowed office at Foundation Capital. The idea was simple to say and almost insane to attempt. For 50 years, the entire chip industry had moved in one direction. Take a silicon wafer, slice it into hundreds of tiny chips, make each chip faster, smaller, cheaper. Andrew wanted to go the opposite way. Don't slice the wafer. Use the whole thing as one chip, the size of a dinner plate. The problem is, people had tried this before. In 1980, a Silicon Valley legend named Gene Amdahl raised $230 million to build a wafer-scale chip. It was, at the time, the largest startup round in history. The prototype shorted out and glowed red-hot in front of executives. The wiring delaminated. The fabrication plant flooded. The company president died. Amdahl himself was in a serious car accident. 5 years later, the project was completely dead. Texas Instruments tried. ITT tried. Even the NSA tried. They all came to the same conclusion. Wafer-scale chips required 99.99% manufacturing yield. Very smart people said that level of perfection couldn't be reached for 100 years. And then, it got worse. By 2018, Andrew had raised hundreds of millions of dollars and still had no working chip. Every silicon wafer they printed had roughly 46 microscopic defects. On a normal chip, even one defect kills the entire thing. Cerebras needed to make a chip with more than 1 million tiny cores work around every defect. and somehow stay alive. They were burning $8 million a month. Andrew has admitted that by 2019, they had incinerated nearly $200 million trying to solve a single technical problem. Every few weeks, he made what he later called the painful walk of shame to the board meeting, to report another failure, to explain the money was almost gone, to ask, again, for trust. He had a wife at home, 2 children, a reputation built across 3 decades in Silicon Valley, and he was watching all of it move, one board meeting at a time, toward a cliff. His engineers had begun to wonder out loud whether the chip was even physically possible. If it wasn't, $200 million of other people's money would simply disappear. And Andrew, the man who had sold 3 companies, would be remembered for the one that proved a 50-year industry rule could not be broken. Then, one ordinary morning in July 2019, in a quiet lab in Sunnyvale, California, 5 engineers gathered around a machine. Andrew was there. So was his co-founder Sean Lai. So were Gary Lauterbach, Michael James, and Jean-Philippe Fricker. They had just finished bolting a wafer the size of a dinner plate onto a custom-built board. To do it, they'd had to invent their own machine that could tighten 40 screws simultaneously without cracking the silicon. Nothing like it had existed before. They had to build it from scratch. They plugged it in. They turned it on. And then they waited. A light started flashing. Then another. Andrew later told TechCrunch, and I'm not paraphrasing this, these are his exact words: "Watching a computer run is about as exciting as watching paint dry. But there we were, watching lights flash on the computer, stunned that we'd solved this." He called it one of the greatest moments of his life. What they had just built was the wafer-scale engine, a single chip nearly 46,000 square millimeters in size, 56 times larger than the biggest NVIDIA GPU, with over 1 million cores, 4 trillion transistors, and almost miraculously, it worked. A month later, in August 2019, Cerebras unveiled the chip publicly at a semiconductor conference called Hot Chips. The room, full of veteran chip engineers, went silent. Some people in the audience laughed. Others assumed it was a prototype that would never ship. But it shipped. And inside it was an answer to a question that had taken Gene Amdahl, Texas Instruments, ITT, and the NSA 40 years and billions of dollars to fail at. What happened next was not a slow climb. It was a vertical line. In November 2019, Cerebras closed a Series E round worth $272 million at a $2.4 billion valuation. The same investors who had watched Andrew walk into board meetings reporting failure now lined up to give him more money. Then came the next generation, WSE2 in 2021, 850,000 cores. Then WSE3 in 2024, a chip capable of training AI models 10 times larger than GPT-4. And then OpenAI, the most valuable AI startup in the world, signed a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy Cerebras Systems. AWS followed, then the Emirati AI giant G42, then the US Department of Energy. By February 2026, Cerebras was valued at $23 billion in private markets. 3 months later, on May 14th, Andrew walked onto the Nasdaq floor in New York. The stock priced at $185 a share. By the closing bell, it had soared 68%. Cerebras closed at a market cap near $100 billion, the largest US tech IPO since Uber went public in 2019. In a single day, Andrew Feldman, the man who had walked into board meetings explaining why $200 million had just disappeared, became worth $3.2 billion. Sean Lai became worth $1.7 billion. 2 billionaires made in one afternoon. And here's the detail almost no one talks about. Remember that original wafer-scale engine? The one that started flashing lights in the Sunnyvale lab in July 2019? It now sits in the Computer History Museum behind glass. Inducted as one of the most important computing innovations of the modern era. If you want me to do a deep dive on the specific moment Andrew turned down Elon Musk's offer to buy Cerebras in 2018, and what that decision cost him personally, comment wafer below, and I'll make that the next video. What Andrew Feldman left behind isn't just a chip company. It isn't even just a $100 billion valuation. It's something stranger and quieter. He left a permission slip. For anyone who has been told their idea is too ambitious, too expensive, too physically impossible. For anyone whose board is losing patience. For anyone who has had to walk into a room full of people who trusted them. And explain again why the money is almost gone, but the work isn't done. His inheritance is the proof that a 50-year-old industry rule isn't always a rule. Sometimes it's just the limit of what the last person tried. And sometimes the difference between impossible and shipped is one team that refused to quit during the months when nothing worked, when even they had started to wonder if it could be done. He left a chip behind a glass case in a museum. He left 2 billionaires made in a single day. But the real thing he left is harder to see and worth more than both. He left the answer to the question every founder eventually has to face. What do you do when the money is running out? The board is losing faith, and the laws of physics seem to be against you. You go back to the lab, you bolt one more wafer to one more board, and you wait for the light to flash. If this story moved you, there are more like it on Rise from Zero. Subscribe. The next founder we cover almost makes Andrew's story look easy,